The moment before I signed the papers for my first home, the people I called Mom and Dad told me I was not their blood. That was brutal. But finding out the government listed me as dead for 33 years was worse. I thought finding my biological family would fix everything. But instead, I walked into a war zone of billionaire secrets and a brother who wanted me erased. Now I am finally taking back what they stole. My name is Naomi Walker. For 33 years, I have walked through this life feeling less like a person and more like a clerical error that the universe forgot to correct. The air conditioner in our rented duplex on the outskirts of Tucson was rattling against the window frame, a dying mechanical wheeze that failed to battle the Arizona heat. It was late, past 11 at night, and the kitchen table was covered in a chaotic spread of bank statements, pay stubs, and printouts of listings for starter homes that we probably could not afford. The fluorescent light above us hummed, casting a sickly yellow pallor over Eli's face. Eli Carter, my husband, was a man of infinite patience. He was a high school history teacher who spent his days trying to make teenagers care about the Industrial Revolution, and his nights trying to build a future for us out of our teacher's salary and my wages from the garage. He tapped the calculator with the eraser end of a pencil, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We are close," he murmured, circling a figure on the notepad. "If we skip the vacation this summer and I take those extra tutoring shifts in September, we might have the down payment by October. Just barely." I watched him. I watched the way his fingers moved, stained slightly with dry erase marker ink. I watched the earnest hope in his eyes. He was so good, so transparently good. He believed that if you worked hard and saved your pennies, the world would eventually let you carve out a small, safe corner for yourself. He believed in systems. He believed in families. He did not know that I was a fraud. Every time we talked about signing a mortgage, about putting our names on a legal document that would bind us to a piece of land forever, a cold spike of panic drove itself into my chest. A house meant a background check. It meant deep dives into credit histories and identities. It meant exposing the lie I had been living since I was barely an adult. "Naomi?" Eli looked up, sensing my silence. "You are gripping that pen like you want to snap it in half." I looked down at my hand. My knuckles were white. The cheap plastic barrel of the ballpoint pen was bending under the pressure. I released it, and it clattered onto the laminate table, the sound too loud in the quiet kitchen. "I cannot do this. Eli," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He frowned, leaning forward. "We can do it. I know the interest rates are high right now, but we have excellent credit. We have been careful." "It is not about the money," I interrupted. Eli went still. He knew me better than anyone, which meant he knew where the jagged edges of my personality were, even if he did not know what caused them. He knew I flinched when people raised their voices. He knew I never talked about my childhood. He knew I had no photos of my parents. I looked at him, and I saw the confusion clouding his kind face. I realized then that I could not let him sign his name next to mine on a 30-year commitment without knowing exactly who or what he was tying himself to. "It is time you knew everything," I said. The words felt heavy, like stones falling from my mouth. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade away as the kitchen dissolved, the peeling paint of our Tucson rental replaced by the memory of dust, cheap vinyl siding, and the smell of impending rain in New Mexico. 15 years ago, I was 18 years old. I was walking up the gravel driveway of the mobile home park where I had spent my entire life. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, but the heat still radiated off the baked earth. In my hands, I carried a white cardboard box. Inside was a small vanilla cake I had bought from the discount bakery rack at the grocery store. It had cost me $4.50, money I had scraped together from collecting aluminum cans. It was my birthday. I remember the feeling in my chest. It was a foolish, fragile thing called hope. I thought that maybe, just maybe, the number 18 would change things. 18 meant I was an adult. 18 meant I could work legal hours. 18 might mean that Frank and Lorna Walker, the people I called Mom and Dad, would finally look at me with something other than burden tolerance, I thought maybe tonight we would sit at the small formica table, eat the cake, and they would tell me stories about when I was a baby. They would finally explain why we moved so often, why I had no grandparents, why the world always felt like something we were hiding from. I climbed the metal steps to the trailer, careful to step over the rusted spot on the third stair. I balanced the cake box on one hand and opened the door. "Mom, Dad," I called out, "I bought cake." The air inside the trailer was stagnant and hot. The swamp cooler was turned off, which was strange for July, but that was not the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was the suitcase. It was an old, hard-shelled brown suitcase, scuffed and battered, sitting squarely in the center of the living room rug. It was bulging, the latches straining to keep it closed. It was my suitcase. I recognized it from the times we had packed up in the middle of the night to flee some unseen debt collector or landlord. Frank was sitting in his recliner, a can of beer in his hand. He was not watching television. He was just staring at the door, waiting for me. Lorna stood by the kitchenette, wiping the counter with a rag, over and over again, refusing to look up. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. The cake box felt suddenly heavy in my hands. Frank took a slow sip of his beer, then set the can down on the side table. He did not stand up. He looked at me with eyes that were as cold and flat as a frozen lake. "Happy birthday, Naomi," he said. The words had no warmth. They sounded like a sentence being passed. I stepped forward, confusion swirling in my head. "Are we going somewhere? Is that why my bag is packed?" "You are going somewhere," Frank corrected. "We are staying right here." I looked at Lorna. "Mom?" Lorna scrubbed the counter harder. Her shoulders were hunched, her faded floral blouse damp with sweat. She did not answer. Frank leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Listen to me closely. Girl, you are 18 today. That means you are legal. That means the clock has run out." "What clock?" I asked. "I do not understand." "You are not our blood," Frank said. The words hung in the air, suspending time. I heard them, but my brain refused to process them. It was like he had spoken in a foreign language. "What?" I whispered. "You are not our kid," Frank said, louder this time, his voice grating like gravel. "Never were. We took you in because we had to. We made a deal to keep you fed and housed until you turned 18. Today is the day. Contract fulfilled." I felt the blood drain from my face. My knees went weak, and I stumbled back against the doorframe. The cake box slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. I did not even look down to see the ruin of the frosting. "But," I stammered, "but you are my parents. I have your name. I have lived here my whole life." "Names do not mean anything." Frank scoffed. He stood up then, towering over the small living room. He was a big man, smelling of motor oil and stale tobacco. He pointed a grease-stained finger at the door. "You are done here. Get your bag and get out." I looked at the suitcase, then back at him. My mind was racing, trying to find a purchase on this slippery, vertical cliff face of reality. "If I am not your daughter," I screamed, my voice cracking, "then who am I? Who are my real parents? Where are they?" Frank's expression did not change. Not my problem. I turned to Lorna, the woman who had bandaged my scraped knees, even if she did so without a kiss, the woman who had taught me to sew, even if she never praised my work. "Mom, please," I begged, dropping to my knees. I crawled across the linoleum toward her. "Please tell me this is a joke. Please tell me who I am." Lorna finally stopped scrubbing. She turned to look at me, and her face was a mask of terror. Her eyes darted to Frank, then back to me. Her lips trembled. Frank took a step toward us, a warning growl in his throat. "Lorna, do not." I reached out and grabbed the hem of Lorna's skirt. "Mom, please, just tell me, where do I go?" Lorna flinched as if I had burned her. She reached down and peeled my fingers off her skirt, one by one. Her hands were cold and clammy. "I am sorry." "Naomi," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "You have to go. Just go. Please. Forget you ever knew us. Assume we never existed. Frank grabbed my arm then. His grip was bruising. He hauled me to my feet and shoved me toward the door. I stumbled, grabbing the handle of the brown suitcase instinctively. "Get out," Frank roared. "And do not ever come back. If I see your face in this park again, I will call the sheriff and tell him you are trespassing." He opened the screen door and pushed me. I fell down the metal steps, landing hard in the dirt. The suitcase tumbled down after me, bursting open slightly, a sleeve of my favorite flannel shirt poking out like a tongue. The door slammed shut. The deadbolt slid home with a sound that was louder than a gunshot. I sat there in the dirt. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the world was turning gray. I looked at the closed door. I looked at the white box inside the trailer, visible through the screen, sitting on the floor where I had dropped it. The cake I had bought for my own birthday was melting in the heat of a home that was not mine. I was 18 years old. I had $40 in my pocket. I had no car. I had no phone. And apparently, I had no name. I sat in the dust until the mosquitoes started to bite, until the lights in the neighbors' trailers flickered on, until the realization settled into my bones like a heavy lead weight. I was not just homeless. I was rootless. I was a person who had been pruned from the family tree and tossed onto the burn pile. The silence of the Tucson kitchen rushed back in, filling my ears. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. I was 33 years old now, sitting across from the man I loved. Yet I felt exactly like that 18-year-old girl sitting in the dirt. My hand was gripping the pen so hard, my fingernails were digging into my palm. I looked up at Eli. His face had gone pale. He had stopped calculating numbers. The notepad was forgotten. He looked horrified, not with disgust, but with a profound, aching sorrow. "My God, Naomi," Eli breathed. "You never told me. You never told me you were thrown out like that." He reached across the table and covered my trembling hand with his warm one. "You did not have a family," he said softly. I pulled my hand back, shaking my head slowly. The anger that had been simmering under my skin for 15 years began to bubble up, mixing with the fear of what I had to do next. "No, Eli," I said, my voice steadying, turning cold. "That is what I thought, too. I thought that night was the absolute bottom. I thought being disowned was the worst thing that could happen to a person." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You think that was the end of the tragedy?" I told him, but actually, that was just the opening act. The real horror was not that they threw me out. The real horror was why they took me in the first place. The first apartment I rented was not really an apartment at all. It was a converted storage room above a laundromat in the industrial district of Tucson, where the air permanently tasted of dryer lint and diesel fumes. The rent was $300 a month, which was exactly half of what I made working graveyard shifts at the gas station. The walls were cracked in patterns that looked like spider webs, and black mold bloomed in the corners of the ceiling like bruised flowers. Every night, 18-wheelers rumbled down the highway 50 feet away, shaking the single pane of glass in the window until I thought it would shatter. I learned to sleep to the rhythm of air brakes and shifting gears. I did not sleep much, though. Sleep was a luxury for people who had safety nets. I had $40 and a burning, terrified need to prove that I could survive without the people who had thrown me away. I took every shift I could get, by day. I washed dishes at a 24-hour diner, my hands permanently wrinkled and smelling of bleach and old grease. By night, I sat behind the bulletproof glass of the gas station, watching the drunks and the truckers stumble in for jerky and cigarettes. I ate whatever was about to expire. Sandwiches with curling crusts, bruised apples, instant noodles made with lukewarm tap water. There were times, usually around 3 in the morning when my body was screaming for rest, that I would find myself leaning against the mop handle, staring at the fluorescent lights and asking the question that had no answer. Why? If I was not their blood, if I was just a burden they had been contracted to carry, why did they keep me for 18 years? Why not dump me at a fire station when I was a baby? Why feed me, clothe me, and send me to school for nearly 2 decades just to sever the tie the second the clock struck midnight on my birthday. It felt like a long, cruel joke with a punchline I was too stupid to understand. But I did not have time for philosophy. I had rent to pay. It was on one of those hollow, exhausted nights that Eli walked in. He was not my husband then. He was just a skinny guy with messy brown hair and a fraying cardigan, looking completely out of place among the roughnecks and night owls. He drove a beat-up Honda that sounded like it was dying of asthma. He came in at 2 a.m, looking as tired as I felt. He put a large black coffee and a pack of gum on the counter. His fingers were stained with red ink. "Rough night?" I asked. My voice was raspy from disuse. He looked up, blinking behind his glasses, grading papers. "Student teaching is going to kill me before I even get my degree. I have 30 essays on the Civil War to finish by 8 a.m. I rang him up, $1.50. He handed me 2 singles. "Keep the change. You look like you need it more than I do." I stiffened. I hated pity. Pity was close to charity. And charity was what Frank and Lorna claimed they had given me. I pushed the 2 quarters back across the metal counter. "I am fine," I said sharply. Eli paused. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Not at the uniform or the dark circles under my eyes, but at the defiance in my posture. He smiled, and it was a genuine, lopsided thing that made him look younger. "Okay," he said, "then buy yourself a better coffee than this sludge." He came back the next night, and the night after that. He was a creature of habit. He would buy his coffee, maybe a donut, and stand at the counter for 5 minutes while the machine brewed a fresh pot. We talked about small things. He told me about his students, the kids who struggled to read, the ones who acted out because they were hungry. I told him about the cars that came through, identifying engine problems by the sound alone, a skill I had learned unwillingly in Frank's garage. I never talked about my past. Whenever he asked where I grew up, or if my parents lived nearby, I would become busy with the register or start wiping down the counter. I had built a wall around that part of me, a fortress of silence. One night, about 6 months after we met, I fainted. I had not eaten a real meal in 2 days, trying to save enough for a security deposit on a better apartment. I was stocking shelves when the world suddenly tilted sideways and went gray. The next thing I knew, I was sitting on the floor, my back against the cooler, and Eli was kneeling in front of me, pressing a cold bottle of water to my neck. "Drink," he commanded. His voice was not gentle, it was scared. I drank. The sugar from the soda he forced on me hit my bloodstream, and the world sharpened back into focus. I saw the concern etched into his face, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to lean into it instead of pulling away. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked. "I do not know." I lied. "Lunch?" He did not believe me. He stood up, walked to the aisle, grabbed a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly. He paid for them, then sat on the floor of the gas station next to me and made a sandwich on a napkin. "Eat," he said. I took a bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. I ate the whole thing, and then I cried. I cried because I was exhausted, because I was hungry, and because someone had noticed. Eli did not ask why I was crying. He just sat there, guarding me from the door, letting me fall apart. From that night on, he became the anchor in my drifting life. When he graduated and got his first full-time teaching job, he took me out to a real dinner, my first in years. We went to a diner that had cloth napkins. I felt underdressed in my work jeans, but Eli looked at me like I was royalty. I was terrifyingly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was waiting for him to ask the hard questions, to demand to meet my family, to realize I was damaged goods. One evening, sitting in his car watching the sunset over the desert, I tried to push him away. "You do not know anything about me." "Eli," I said, staring out the windshield, "you do not know who my people are. You do not know why I am alone. I am a ghost. I have no history." Eli turned off the engine. The silence stretched between us, comfortable and heavy. "I do not care about your history." "Naomi?" he said. I looked at him, shocked. "How can you say that? Everyone cares." "I do not," he insisted. He reached across the console and took my hand. His palm was warm and dry. I do not need to know where you come from. I do not need to see baby pictures or meet a father who clearly does not deserve you. I only care about where you want to go next, and I want to go there with you. That was the moment the wall crumbled. Not all at once, but enough for him to step through. We got married 2 years later on a Tuesday morning. It was not the wedding girls dream about. There was no white lace, no church bells, no father to walk me down the aisle. We went to the county courthouse downtown. My witness was Barb, a 60-year-old waitress from the diner who smoked menthols and called everyone honey. I wore a cream-colored sundress I had found at a thrift store for $12. It was slightly loose in the waist, but I had pinned it back. Eli wore his only suit, a navy blue one that was a little shiny at the elbows. When the judge asked us to exchange rings, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of disbelief. I was standing in a sunbeam, holding the hand of a man who knew I was broken and loved the jagged pieces anyway. I do, I said, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I existed. I was not just Frank and Lorna's unwanted obligation anymore. I was Naomi Carter. I was someone's wife. We built our life slowly, brick by brick. We were relentless. I quit the diner and the gas station, using the knowledge I had absorbed during those miserable years in the trailer park. I talked my way into an administrative job at a large auto repair shop. I knew parts, I knew labor times, and I knew how to handle difficult mechanics. I organized their chaotic filing system, digitized their inventory, and within a year, I was running the front office. Eli took on extra tutoring after school. He coached the debate team for a small stipend. We lived well below our means, saving every dollar that did not go to rent or food. We had a goal, a house. We wanted walls that we owned. We wanted a yard where we could plant a garden that would not be dug up by a landlord. We wanted a nursery. 5 years of scraping. 5 years of brown bag lunches and quiet nights in front of the television because movies were too expensive. 5 years of love that grew deep and quiet roots in the hard soil of our shared struggle. Which brings me back to the kitchen table. I watched Eli read the mortgage application I had finally filled out. The paper was crisp and white, a symbol of everything we had fought for. "If everything goes perfectly," I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice, "we could be closing in 30 days. 1 month, Eli. 1 month until we are not renters anymore." Eli grinned, that same boyish, lopsided grin from the gas station. He picked up the stack of papers, weighing them in his hand like gold. "This is it, Naomi," he said, "the start of the rest of our lives. No more looking back." I smiled back at him, my heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. I truly believed him. I believed that the hard part was over. I believed that the darkness of my childhood was finally in the rearview mirror, shrinking until it would disappear completely. I reached out and smoothed the cover page of the application. The names were printed clearly at the top: Eli James Carter and Naomi R. Walker. I did not know it then, but I was not signing a ticket to freedom. I was signing a warrant. I was about to hand the federal government a key to a door that had been locked for 33 years. And behind that door was a monster that would devour our simple, happy life whole. I looked at the clock. It was midnight. "Let us turn it in tomorrow," I said. "Tomorrow," Eli agreed. We turned off the kitchen light, plunging the room into darkness, unaware that we were already standing in the shadow of a storm that had been gathering since the year I was born. The morning sun glinted off the glass doors of the Westline Community Bank, blindingly bright. It felt like a good omen. I squeezed Eli's hand as we walked in, the air conditioning hitting us with a blast of cool, expensive-smelling air. It smelled like carpet cleaner and fresh currency. We were 5 minutes early for our 9 o'clock appointment. I was wearing my best blazer, the one I usually saved for meetings with the regional managers at the garage, and Eli had combed his hair with a precision that made my heart ache. We were playing the part of the responsible, upwardly mobile couple. We had the binder, we had the pay stubs, we had the dream. Our loan officer was a woman named Jenna. She had a bob of silver hair, rimless glasses, and a desk cluttered with photos of smiling grandchildren. She was warm, the kind of woman who probably baked cookies for her neighbors. "You two are remarkably organized," Jenna said, flipping through our 3 years of tax returns. She smiled, tapping a long, manicured fingernail on the spreadsheet Eli had made. "Most young couples come in here with a shoebox full of receipts and a prayer. This is excellent. Your debt-to-income ratio is solid. The down payment is, well, it is tight, but it is there." Eli beamed. "We have been saving for 5 years, ma'am." Jenna nodded approvingly. "I love seeing that. The market is tough, but you two are doing everything right. Let us just run the final credit pull and verify the identities through the federal system, and we should be able to print out a pre-approval letter within the hour." She turned to her computer. I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard. Click, click, click. The sound was rhythmic, soothing. It was the sound of doors opening. She picked up my driver's license and the small card with my national identity number on it. "Naomi R. Walker," she muttered to herself as she typed. "Date of birth, July 14th. Okay." She hit the enter key. I waited for the printer to whir to life. I waited for her to turn back with that grandmotherly smile and hand us a pen. Instead, the rhythm stopped. Jenna frowned. She leaned in closer to the monitor, squinting slightly. She tapped the backspace key a few times and retyped the number. Her speed was slower this time, deliberate. "Is everything okay?" Eli asked, leaning forward in his chair. Jenna did not answer immediately. She hit enter again. Then she reached for her mouse and clicked something, her brow furrowing deep enough to hold a coin. The warmth began to drain from the cubicle. "Just a system hiccup," she said, but her voice had lost its lilt. "It happens. The Federal Citizen Registry can be slow in the mornings." She picked up the phone on her desk and dialed a 4-digit extension. She turned her chair slightly away from us, lowering her voice. "Hey, Mike, it is Jenna. I am getting a code 99 on a credit pull." "Yeah." "No, the customer is sitting right here. Can you override?" She listened for a moment, and I saw her spine stiffen. She went very still. "Okay," she whispered. "I see. Thanks." She hung up the phone slowly. When she turned back to us, the grandmotherly warmth was gone. It had been replaced by a professional, guarded mask. She looked at me. Not at Eli. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and something that looked uncomfortably like suspicion. "Mrs. Walker," she said, and the title felt heavy. "Is there any chance you gave me the wrong number? Maybe a typo on your card?" "No," I said, my stomach tightening. "I have had that number my whole life. I use it for my taxes, my payroll, everything." Jenna took a deep breath. She turned her monitor screen so we could see it. The screen was a wash of gray and blue data fields, but right in the center, blinking in a stark red box, was a status alert. Status, inactive, deceased, infant. Date of record, November 19, 33 years ago. I stared at the screen. The words swam before my eyes. Deceased, infant. "This has to be a mistake," Eli said, his voice rising. He pointed at me. "She is sitting right here. She is obviously not a deceased infant. She is 33 years old. She pays taxes. We just filed our joint return in April." Jenna did not look reassured. She looked nervous. "Mr. Carter, I understand that, but the bank system is linked directly to the FCR. As far as this system is concerned, the owner of this identity number died more than 3 decades ago. I cannot process a loan for a deceased person. It automatically flags as fraud." "Fraud?" I choked out the word. "I am not accusing you," Jenna said quickly, holding up her hands, "but the system locks it down. I cannot override this. Nobody in this branch can. If we try to push it through, the federal algos will freeze your accounts entirely." She pushed the paperwork back across the desk toward us. It felt like she was sliding a weapon away from herself. "You need to go to the National Identity Integrity Commission," she said. "There is a regional office downtown. You have to get a clearance letter from them proving you are alive and that this is a clerical error. Until then." She paused, looking at the house listing on top of our pile. "Until then, we cannot lend you a dime." The walk back to the car was silent. The sun was still shining, but now it felt harsh, exposing. I felt like everyone on the sidewalk was looking at me, seeing the red deceased stamp on my forehead. In the safety of our beat-up sedan, Eli slammed his hands against the steering wheel. "Unbelievable," he shouted. "A computer glitch. We work for 5 years, and we get stopped by a data entry error from the 80s? He started the car, the engine sputtering to life. "We will go down there tomorrow. We will show them your birth certificate, your license, everything. We will yell at some bureaucrat until they fix it. It is just a mistake. Naomi." I looked out the window as we merged onto the highway. The desert landscape blurred by. Brown scrub, cactus, telephone poles. "Is it?" I asked quietly. Eli glanced at me. "Of course it is. You have a job, you have a life, you exist." I rubbed my thumb over the strap of my seatbelt. The logic was sound. I paid taxes. I had a driver's license. I had a library card. But in the back of my mind, a dark, cold door was creaking open. Frank and Lorna, the suitcase, the way they had never, not once in 18 years, shown me a birth certificate, the way Frank had handled my enrollment in school by talking to the principal in private, the way we never went to doctors, only to a friend of Frank's who was a retired combat medic. "They told me I wasn't their blood," I whispered, "but they never told me whose blood I was." Eli sighed, reaching over to squeeze my knee. "Babe, stop. Do not go down that rabbit hole. This is government incompetence, not a conspiracy. We will fix it." But the dread in my stomach was heavy, like I had swallowed a stone. I felt untethered. If the government said I was dead, did I really exist? The next morning, the National Identity Integrity Commission building loomed over the downtown district like a fortress of gray concrete and tinted glass. It was ugly, imposing, and devoid of humanity. We had to pass through a metal detector just to get into the lobby. There were no smiling grandmothers here. There were armed guards and rows of plastic chairs bolted to the floor. I took a ticket from a machine. Number 402. We waited for 3 hours. I watched the people around me. A man arguing about his pension. A woman crying over a lost passport. Everyone looked tired. Everyone looked small against the weight of the system. Finally, a mechanical voice announced my number. Window 7. We walked up to the glass partition. Behind it sat a woman who looked like she was carved out of granite. Her name tag read, Agent Maya Reed. She wore a sharp navy suit, and her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She did not smile. "Name and nature of inquiry," she said, without looking up. "Naomi Walker," I said. My voice trembled. So I cleared my throat and tried again. "Naomi Walker. The bank said my identity number is flagged as deceased." Agent Reed stopped typing. She looked up. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and completely devoid of empathy. "ID and number, please." I slid my license and the card under the glass. She picked them up with 2 fingers, as if they might be contaminated. She typed the number into her terminal. I held my breath. Eli stood close behind me, his hand on the small of my back, a warm pressure grounding me. Agent Reed stared at her screen. She stared for a long time. Then she typed something else. Then she picked up a phone, just like Jenna had, but she didn't speak into it. She just listened. She hung up the phone and looked at me. This time, her expression had changed. The boredom was gone. In its place was a cold, clinical curiosity. She pressed a button under her desk, and I heard a magnetic lock click on the door to the left of the counter. "Ms. Walker, Mr. Carter, please come around to the side door. I need you to step into interview room B." "Why?" Eli asked, stepping forward. "Can't you just fix the error here?" "It is not an error that can be fixed at the counter," Agent Reed said. "Please, now." We walked through the door, The air inside the office was even colder than the lobby. Agent Reed led us into a small, windowless room with a metal table and 3 chairs. It looked like an interrogation room from a cop show, minus the two-way mirror. "Sit down." We sat. Agent Reed did not sit. She stood on the other side of the table, holding a file folder she had printed from a machine in the hallway. She opened the folder and laid a single sheet of paper on the table. Facing us, it was a copy of a death certificate. It was old, grainy, the edges black from the photocopy machine. "This is the record associated with that NIN," Agent Reed said. I looked at the paper. The name on it was not Naomi Walker. The name was Hazel Marlowe. Date of death, November 19th, 33 years ago. Cause of death, presumed deceased following abduction. I looked up at Agent Reed, my mouth dry. "I do not understand. Who is Hazel Marlowe?" Agent Reed leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the metal table. "That is the question, isn't it?" she said softly. "Because according to the Federal Citizen Registry, Naomi Walker does not exist. There is no birth certificate for a Naomi Walker anywhere in the United States, no hospital records, no Social Security application." She tapped the paper. "This number belongs to Hazel Marlowe, a baby girl who went missing from a park in Boulder, Colorado, 3 decades ago. The case was closed. The child was declared legally dead." The room seemed to tilt. The walls were closing in. "So," Agent Reed continued, her voice sharp as a scalpel, "if you are using a dead child's number and you have no birth record, then who exactly are you, and where did you come from?" I looked at Eli. He was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of the situation. I looked back at the death certificate. The date of the abduction was exactly 1 week after the birthday I had always celebrated. "I am not dead," I whispered. Agent Reed crossed her arms. "Prove it," she said, "because right now, the only thing the government knows for sure is that you are a ghost living in a dead girl's skin, and we are going to find out who put you there." The air in the interview room seemed to have been sucked out by a vacuum, leaving behind a sterile silence that pressed against my eardrums. Agent Maya Reed did not blink. She sat across from me with the posture of a statue. Her hands clasped over the file that contained the death certificate of a child named Hazel. "According to the file," she said, her voice devoid of inflection, "Hazel Marlowe was abducted from a park in Boulder, Colorado. She was 14 months old. The investigation ran for 5 years. There were no leads, no ransom demands. Eventually, the case went cold, and a judge granted a petition for a presumptive death certificate so the family could settle the estate and try to move on. It is a legal formality. It allows the living to stop waiting for the dead." I stared at her. My hands were gripping the edge of the metal table so hard my fingers were numb. "So you are saying I am a ghost," I said. "Technically, you are worse than a ghost," Reed replied. "You are an anomaly. We only flagged this because the Department of Homeland Security recently merged the old state vital records with the federal tax database. The algorithm realized that a Social Security number marked deceased in Colorado has been paying income tax in Arizona for 15 years. Before I could process the absurdity of being caught by a tax algorithm, the door behind Reed opened. 2 people walked in. They did not look like bureaucrats. They looked like hunters. The man was tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his cheap gray suit. He had a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite with a dull chisel. The woman next to him was smaller, sharp-eyed, wearing a lanyard that identified her as MCIU. "I am Special Agent Jonas Hale," the man said. He did not offer his hand. "This is Agent Priya Nolan. We are with the Missing Citizens Investigation Unit." "MCIU," I repeated. I had never heard of it. "We handle the cases that do not make sense," Nolan said. Her voice was softer than Hale's, but her eyes were scanning me like a barcode reader. She set a heavy black case on the table and snapped the latches open. Inside were a fingerprint scanner, a camera, and swabs for DNA collection. "We need to process you, Ms. Walker, Hale said. Stand up. I looked at Eli. He was sitting in the corner chair, his face pale. He gave me a small, terrified nod. I stood up. For the next hour, I was not a person. I was a specimen. Nolan took my fingerprints, pressing each digit onto the glass plate with clinical precision. She took photos of my face from 3 angles. She used a cotton swab to scrape the inside of my cheek. Then she asked me to roll up my sleeves. Any birthmarks? Scars? Permanent discolorations? She asked. I have a small strawberry mark on my left shoulder blade, I said. Hale looked up from his notepad. Show us. I hesitated, feeling a flush of humiliation. Eli stood up, stepping between me and the agents. Is this necessary? He asked, his voice shaking with anger. She is the victim here, isn't she? You are treating her like a suspect. We are treating her like evidence, Hale corrected flatly, because right now, that is what she is. If she is Hazel Marlowe, she will have a matching birthmark recorded in the original missing person file. If she is not, then we need to know who she is. I put a hand on Eli's arm. It is okay, I whispered. I turned my back to the agents and pulled the collar of my blouse down just enough to reveal the reddish mark on my skin. Nolan snapped a photo. The flash was blinding in the small room. Sit down, Hale commanded. He threw a piece of paper onto the table. It was a photocopy of a birth certificate. I recognized it immediately. It was the only proof of existence I had ever seen. It listed my name as Naomi Ruth Walker, born in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. This is a forgery, Hale stated. It is not, I argued, though my voice lacked conviction. That is my birth certificate. My dad gave it to me when I needed to get my driver's license. It is a photocopy of a generic template you can buy at any stationery store, Hale said. There is no file number, no raised seal. And here's the kicker. We checked the records in Truth or Consequences. The town hall had a flood in 1995. A lot of records were destroyed. It is a convenient place to claim a child was born if you know the records can never be verified. Whoever gave you this knew exactly what they were doing. Frank, I thought Frank knew. Nolan leaned forward, her tone shifting to something more conversational, almost gentle. Tell us about your childhood. Naomi, not the big things, the small things. Did you have family dinners with grandparents? Did aunts and uncles come over for Christmas? Did you have sleepovers with neighbors? I opened my mouth to say yes, to defend the normalcy of my life, but the words died in my throat. I looked back at the 18 years I spent in that trailer. No, I said slowly. We moved a lot, every 2 or 3 years. Frank would say the rent was going up, or he had a disagreement with a boss, and we would pack the car in the middle of the night. And school? Nolan asked. I was homeschooled until 3rd grade. I recalled. Then, when I finally went to public school, Frank was weird about it. I wasn't allowed to join clubs, no field trips. If I made a friend and they wanted to come over, Lorna would say the house was too messy. Always. I looked at my hands. I never met a single relative. I whispered. Frank said his parents were dead and Lorna was an orphan. It was just the 3 of us, always just us against the world. That is what he used to tell me. The world is dangerous. Naomi, you stick with us. Hale let out a short, dry laugh. It wasn't amusement. It was disgust. The world wasn't dangerous, he said. They were dangerous. He leaned across the table, invading my personal space. Here is the working theory. Naomi, 33 years ago, someone takes a baby from a park in Colorado. Maybe it was a ransom job gone wrong. Maybe they wanted a kid and couldn't have one. Doesn't matter. But you cannot just raise a kid off the grid forever. Eventually, she needs a doctor. She needs school. She needs a paper trail. He tapped the death certificate of Hazel Marlowe. So they find a workaround. They find an identity that nobody is using. A dead child. They assume the parents of the dead girl aren't looking anymore. They assume the government isn't cross-referencing death records with school enrollments. They steal the dead girl's number and plaster it onto the stolen kid. It is called ghosting, and it worked for 3 decades. The room spun. I felt bile rise in my throat. You think Frank and Lorna kidnapped me? I asked. We do not think, Hale said. We know they are involved. The question is whether they took you themselves or they bought you from someone else. Bought me? The words tasted like ash. Nolan pushed a notepad toward me. We need to find them. Naomi, we need every address you remember. We need the names of the garages Frank worked at. We need to know where Lorna sold those crafts she made. We need the license plate of the truck they drove when they kicked you out. I stared at the blank white paper. I thought about Frank. I thought about the way his hands looked, permanently stained with grease. I remembered the night I had a fever of 104, and he sat up with me, putting cool rags on my forehead. I remembered Lorna teaching me how to mend a tear in my jeans so it wouldn't show. They were cruel. They were cold. They had thrown me out like garbage on my 18th birthday, but they were the only parents I had ever known. If I give you this, I said, my voice trembling, what happens to them? They go to federal prison, Hale said without hesitation, for a very, very long time. I closed my eyes. A wave of irrational guilt washed over me. I felt like a traitor. How could I send the man who taught me to tie my shoes to prison? How could I destroy the woman who cooked my dinner every night for 18 years? I cannot, I whispered. They are my parents, even if they are bad ones. Hale slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot, making me jump. They are not your parents, he shouted. He stood up and walked around the table until he was standing right next to me. He lowered his voice to a lethal growl. Listen to me. If they kidnapped you, they did not just raise you, they stole you. They watched a mother cry on the news for her missing baby, and they turned the channel. They watched a father tear apart his life searching for his daughter, and they decided their desire to play house was more important. He pointed a finger at my chest. They stole your entire life, Naomi. Every birthday you celebrated in a trailer park was a birthday your real family spent mourning a ghost. You do not owe Frank and Lorna your loyalty. You owe them nothing but a cell number. I looked at Eli. He was crying. Silent tears were running down his face. He nodded at me. Do it, his eyes said. Free yourself. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt sharp, like inhaling broken glass. I picked up the pen. I remembered the suitcase. I remembered the look in Frank's eyes when he told me I wasn't his blood. Contract fulfilled. That was what he had said. I was just a contract. I pressed the pen to the paper. Frank Walker usually works under the table, I said, my voice sounding strange and detached. He likes diesel engines. He hangs around truck stops in New Mexico. The last time I saw them, they were heading toward the border. Red Mesa, maybe. Nolan started writing furiously. What else? Lorna sells turquoise jewelry at flea markets. I continued. She uses the name Lorraine sometimes. They drive a 1998 Ford F-150, two-tone paint, beige and brown. It has a dent on the rear passenger bumper. I wrote down everything, the names of Frank's drinking buddies, the specific brand of tobacco he smoked, the way Lorna walked with a slight limp when it rained. I poured 18 years of intimate, painful observation onto the page. I was dissecting my childhood and handing the pieces over to the executioners. When I was done, I dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and hit the edge of the DNA kit. Thank you, Hale said. He snatched the paper up like it was a winning lottery ticket. We will find them. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. We are going to run the DNA against the Marlowe family samples on file, he said. We should know for sure within 48 hours. He walked out. Nolan followed, closing the heavy door behind her. I sat there in the silence, staring at the ink stains on my fingers. I had just signed the warrant for the people who raised me. I had just burned the only bridge I had ever walked across. Naomi? Eli whispered. I looked up at him. The room felt vast and empty. If this is true, I said, my voice barely a whisper, if Frank and Lorna are just kidnappers, and Naomi Walker is just a name on a fake birth certificate. I touched my chest, feeling the beat of my heart under my ribs. Then for 33 years, who was I? The drive to Red Mesa, New Mexico, took 6 hours, but it felt like traveling back in time to a life I had fought to bury. The landscape shifted from the paved order of the city to the chaotic, dusty sprawl of the borderlands. Red Mesa was barely a town. It was a collection of rusted tin roofs, stray dogs, and secrets hidden under the blinding desert sun. I sat in the back of an unmarked surveillance van, sandwiched between Agent Hale and a bank of glowing monitors. My hands were shaking, not from the air conditioning, which was blasting at freezing temperatures, but from the image on the screen in front of me. It was them. The camera was zoomed in on a cinderblock structure with a faded sign that read, "Frank's Heavy Repair." Next to it sat a double-wide mobile home, beige with brown trim, peeling in the heat. It was terrifyingly identical to the one I had grown up in. The same oil-stained dirt patch, the same wind chimes made of old spark plugs hanging from the porch. "There is movement near the bay doors," the tech guy said, adjusting the focus. I leaned in. A man walked out, wiping his hands on a filthy rag. He was heavier now, his stomach straining against his grease-stained coveralls, and his hair was thinner, more gray than black, but the walk was the same, that heavy, lumbering gait of a man who felt he owned every inch of ground he stepped on. Frank. Seeing him on a screen, unaware he was being watched, stripped away the childhood myth of him. He was not the towering authority figure who controlled my world anymore. He was just a man, a dirty, aging man in the middle of nowhere. "Are we sure?" Hale asked me, his voice low. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That is him. That is Frank Walker." Hale nodded and tapped his earpiece. "All units. Target positively identified. We move on my mark. Remember, we have intel suggesting they move contraband parts for the cartels. Assume they are armed." I watched as the tactical team, dressed in heavy body armor, moved silently through the scrub brush surrounding the property. It felt surreal, like watching a movie of my own life. These people, who had terrified me into silence for 18 years, were about to be swarmed by the full force of the federal government. "Execute," Hale said. On the screen, chaos erupted. The team breached the perimeter fence. Flashbang grenades detonated near the garage entrance, creating blinding bursts of white light on the monitor. "Federal agents!" shouted a voice that the van's audio pickup amplified into a roar. "Get on the ground! Now!" I watched Frank stumble back, dropping his rag. He reached for something on the workbench. A wrench, maybe, or a gun. But 3 agents were on him before he could twitch. They slammed him face first into the concrete floor. The sound of his body hitting the ground made me flinch, a phantom echo of every time he had shoved me. "Secure! 1 male in custody," a voice crackled. Then I saw Lorna. She came running out of the mobile home, wearing a faded housecoat, screaming. 2 agents intercepted her. Grabbing her arms, she went limp, collapsing into the dirt, her mouth open in a wail I could not hear over the static. "It is done," Hale said, removing his headset. He looked at me. "Do you want to do this? Naomi? You can stay here." I looked at the screen. Frank was cuffed, his face pressed into the oil stains he had spent his life creating. "I need to look him in the eye," I said. The walk from the van to the garage was the longest walk of my life. The heat hit me like a physical blow. The smell of diesel and dry earth filled my nose, triggering a nausea so violent I almost stopped. It smelled like my childhood. It smelled like fear. Agent Nolan walked beside me, her hand hovering near her holster, but I barely noticed her. My eyes were locked on the open bay doors of the garage. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sharp tang of the flashbangs. Frank was hauled up to his knees by 2 agents. He was breathing hard, sweat streaking the grime on his face. Lorna was seated on a stack of tires nearby, weeping into her hands. When I stepped into the light, Frank's head snapped up. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the glare. Then, recognition hit him. It was not guilt I saw in his eyes. It was not regret. It was pure, unadulterated rage. "You," he snarled, straining against the zip ties binding his wrists. You little traitor. You did this? The sound of his voice, that deep, gravelly growl, usually made me shrink. It usually made me apologize. But today, surrounded by agents, with the truth of the death certificate burning in my mind, something in me snapped. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I walked until I was 3 feet away from him. I looked down at the man who had told me I was nothing. The man who had thrown me away like trash. I did not call him Dad. I did not call him Frank. Who am I? I asked. My voice was steady, cutting through the noise of the agents searching the shop. Frank spat on the floor near my shoes. You are a rat. That is what you are. We fed you. We kept you alive. Where did you get me? I demanded, stepping closer. Did you take me? Or did you buy me? Frank laughed, a harsh barking sound. You think you are special? You think you are some prize? You were just a job, girl. Just a package that never stopped crying. Lorna let out a choked sob from the tires. Frank, stop. Shut up, woman, Frank yelled without looking at her. No, Lorna screamed, looking up. Her face was a ruin of tears and running mascara. She looked at me, and her eyes were wide with terror, not of the police, but of the truth. She does not remember. Frank, Lorna cried out, her voice hysterical. Look at her face. She really does not remember any of it. We went too far. We told her she was ours for so long we forgot she was not. The shop went silent. Even the agents stopped rummaging through the tool chests. We went too far. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. It was the confirmation I had dreaded and craved. They knew, all those years, watching me blow out birthday candles, watching me learn to ride a bike. They knew I was a stolen thing. They knew there was a family somewhere else bleeding for me, and they just kept playing house. Agent Jonas Hale stepped forward, holding a clipboard. Frank and Lorna Walker, he announced, his voice booming in the enclosed space. You are under arrest for the abduction of a minor, identity fraud, obstruction of federal justice, and conspiracy to traffic human beings. You have the right to remain silent. Frank did not remain silent. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing into slits of malice. He saw the pain on my face, the realization that my entire life had been a crime scene, and he decided to twist the knife one last time. You want to know about your real family? He sneered. I held my breath. You think they are saints? You think they are some perfect fairy tale? Frank leaned forward as far as the agents holding him would allow. People like us. We do not just walk into high-security nurseries and snatch kids. We take the ones that are left unguarded, the ones nobody is watching. He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. If they loved you so much. Naomi, how did I manage to walk away with you without anyone noticing for an hour? Answer me that. If they are so good, why were you so easy to steal? The question hit me like a physical slap. Doubt, cold and insidious, seeped into the cracks of my heart. I had spent the last few days imagining my biological parents as victims, as tragic figures who had been hunted, but Frank's words painted a different picture, one of negligence, one of a door left open. Get him out of here, Hale ordered. The agents hauled Frank to his feet and dragged him toward the waiting SUV. He kept laughing as they took him away, a sound that would echo in my nightmares for years. Lorna was led out after him, looking back at me one last time with eyes that begged for a forgiveness I did not possess. I stood alone in the center of the garage. I looked at the grease stains on the concrete. I looked at the tools that had built a fake life for me. I felt hollowed out. 2 days later, back in Tucson, I sat in another cold room. This time, it was not an interrogation room, but a small conference office at the MCIU local branch. Eli sat next to me, holding my hand so tight his knuckles were white. Agent Hale sat across from us. On the table lay a single manila envelope. We fast-tracked the DNA comparison, Hale said. He looked tired. His tie was loosened, and there were dark circles under his eyes. We took the sample we got from you and ran it against the CODIS database for cold cases, specifically matching it against the family reference samples from the Boulder kidnapping 3 decades ago. He tapped the envelope. It is a match. Naomi. I stopped breathing. The air conditioning hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. The probability of relation is 99.9%. Hale continued. Your biological markers are consistent with the daughter of Graham and Evelyn Marlowe. Marlowe, I whispered. The name felt foreign on my tongue. It sounded expensive. It sounded like a stranger. So it is true, I said. I am Hazel Marlowe. Hale nodded. You are Hazel Marlowe. You have been missing for 33 years. I looked at Eli. He tried to smile, tried to look relieved for me, but I could see the anxiety in his eyes. We were no longer just Naomi and Eli, the couple trying to buy a starter home. I was suddenly someone else entirely. I was a headline. I was a ghost story that had come back to life. And Frank was right, Hale added gently. I looked up sharply. About what? Hale opened the file and slid a photo across the table. It was a newspaper clipping from the year I was taken. The headline read, Billionaire Heiress Vanishes from Park. Your father, Graham Marlowe, is the CEO of Marlowe Ridge Group, one of the largest real estate development firms in the country. You did not just come from a family. Naomi, you came from a dynasty. I stared at the photo. It showed a young couple, beautiful, wealthy, looking devastated, standing in front of a massive iron gate. Frank's words came back to me. If they loved you so much, how did I manage to walk away with you? I looked at the billionaire couple in the photo. They looked powerful. They looked untouchable. And yet, I had been touched. I had been taken. Naomi? Hale asked. I stood up, my legs feeling shaky but my mind strangely clear. I am not Naomi anymore, I said, looking at the photo of the people who had lost me, but I do not know if I am Hazel, either. I turned to Hale. When do I meet them? Hale closed the folder. They are flying in a private jet. They will be here tomorrow. I nodded. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where my old sedan was parked next to government SUVs. I thought about the trailer in Red Mesa. I thought about the grease on Frank's hands. I thought about the billions of dollars attached to the name Marlowe. I survived Frank Walker. I thought to myself, I survived poverty. I survived being a ghost. I watched my reflection in the glass. Now, let us see if I can survive being a billionaire's daughter. The flight to Colorado was a blur of white leather seats and muffled engine hum, a level of luxury that made me afraid to touch anything. But the arrival at the Marlowe estate was what truly stole the breath from my lungs. We were driving up a winding private road into the foothills above Boulder. The car, a black SUV with tinted windows sent by the family, hummed quietly as it climbed. Beside me, the empty seat felt like a gaping wound. The Marlowe family lawyer had politely but firmly suggested that for this first reunion, it would be best if I came alone to the main house. They had arranged a suite for Eli at a 5-star hotel downtown, citing the need for family intimacy during such a delicate transition. Eli had squeezed my hand before getting into the separate car, telling me to go, that he would be just a phone call away. But as the iron gates of the estate swung open, I felt entirely defenseless. The house was not a house. It was a fortress of glass and steel. Perched on the edge of the mountain like a bird of prey waiting to dive, it glowed in the twilight, warm amber light spilling out onto the snow-dusted pines. It looked like the kind of place where people did not have problems, or at least, not the kind of problems that involved rent or grocery bills. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. The car stopped in a circular driveway paved with stones that looked smoother than my kitchen floor back in Tucson. The driver opened my door. Ms. Marlowe, he said, they are waiting in the drawing room. Ms. Marlowe. The name hit me like a physical shove. I walked up the massive stone steps. The double doors, made of dark, heavy wood, opened before I even reached for the handle. Standing in the foyer were 2 people who looked like they had stepped out of the glossy pages of a magazine, yet they were shattered. Evelyn Marlowe was smaller than I expected. She was wearing a silk blouse that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was a perfect, soft blonde, but her face was pale. Her makeup slightly smudged. She stood frozen, her hands clutching a lace handkerchief to her chest. Graham Marlowe stood beside her. He was tall, imposing, with silver hair and a jawline that suggested he was used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed. But his eyes were red-rimmed. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock somewhere in the vast, echoing hall. Then, Evelyn let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. "Hazel?" she whispered. She took a step forward, her legs shaking so badly I thought she might fall. I instinctively reached out to steady her, and the moment my hand touched her arm, the dam broke. "Oh, my God," she cried, collapsing into me. She buried her face in my neck, her hands gripping my shoulders with a desperate, clawing strength. "It is you. It is really you." I stood there, stiff and awkward, wrapped in the embrace of a woman who smelled of expensive lilies and sorrow. My arms hovered for a second before I slowly, tentatively patted her back. I felt her tears soaking into my cheap blazer. "My baby," she sobbed, rocking me slightly. "My baby girl." I never stopped looking. I never stopped. Graham stepped forward, the powerful CEO, the man the news called a shark, looked like he was about to break apart. He wrapped his large arms around both of us, pulling us into a crushing hug. I could feel him trembling. "I found you," he choked out, his voice rough with emotion. 33 years. Everyone told me to stop. Everyone told me you were gone. But I knew. He pulled back just enough to cup my face in his hands. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, his eyes searching every inch of my face, looking for the ghost of the toddler he had lost. "You have your mother's eyes," he said, tears spilling over his cheeks, and my chin. "God, Hazel, I thought I would die without ever saying your name to your face again." I looked at them. These strangers. They were pouring 3 decades of grief and love onto me, and all I could feel was a confusing numbness. My heart was racing, but my brain was stuck on a split screen. On one side, this warm, fragrant luxury and these weeping parents. On the other side, the image of Frank face down on the oily concrete of the garage, and Lorna screaming as she was dragged away. Those were the people who had bandaged my knees. Those were the people who had taught me to drive, and they were currently sitting in a federal holding cell because of me. "I am here," I managed to say, though the voice did not sound like mine. "I am here now." Come sit," Evelyn said, wiping her eyes but refusing to let go of my hand. She led me into the living room, a space with ceilings 2 stories high and a fireplace large enough to stand in. We sat on a velvet sofa. Evelyn kept touching my hair, my hands, as if checking to make sure I was solid. "We have so much to tell you," Graham said, sitting on the coffee table opposite me, leaning in close. "We want to know everything, but not tonight. Tonight is just for us, just for having you home." The atmosphere was thick with emotion, heavy and suffocating in its intensity. I was trying to formulate a sentence, trying to figure out how to be the daughter they wanted, when the sound of footsteps clicked against the marble floor of the hallway. The rhythm was different. It was not hesitant like mine, or frantic like Evelyn's. It was slow, deliberate, and rhythmic. I looked up. Standing in the archway was a young man. He looked to be about 29 years old. He was wearing a suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, sharp and dark. He was handsome in a way that felt practiced. Perfect hair, perfect skin, and eyes that were as cold as the glass walls surrounding us. Graham straightened up, wiping his face quickly, regaining some of his composure. "Hazel," he said, his voice filling with pride, "I want you to meet someone. This is your brother." The young man walked into the room. He did not rush. He did not look like he had been crying. He looked like he was walking into a boardroom meeting that he found mildly inconvenient. "Landon," Graham said, gesturing to me. This is Hazel." Landon stopped a few feet away, He looked at me. He did not look at my eyes or my smile. He looked at my shoes, scuffed, my blazer, polyester blend, and my hands, rough from years of manual labor. It was a scan, a comprehensive appraisal of an asset. I stood up, my instinct to be polite overriding my discomfort. I took a step toward him and extended my hand, half expecting a hug, half hoping for a warm handshake. "Hi. Landon," I said. It is a lot to take in. I know." Landon looked at my outstretched hand for a second too long. Then he took it. His palm was cool and dry. His grip was limp, offering zero pressure. The kind of handshake that tells you exactly where you stand in the hierarchy. "Welcome home," he said. His voice was smooth, baritone, and completely empty. There was no tremor of emotion, no spark of curiosity. 33 years is a long time," he added, releasing my hand quickly. We were all quite surprised by the news from the agency. The way he said surprised made it sound like suspicious. Evelyn beamed, oblivious to the frost in the air. "Isn't it a miracle, Landon? Your sister, the one we told you about since you were a little boy, she is finally here." Landon smiled at his mother, a thin, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "A miracle, indeed," he said. "The odds of a recovery after this duration are statistical anomalies." He turned his gaze back to me. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and guarded. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not a brother welcoming a long-lost sibling. This was a man looking at an intruder. I sat back down, pulling my hand into my lap. I realized then that while Graham and Evelyn saw a daughter, Landon saw something else. He saw a division of assets. He saw a threat to his position as the sole heir of the Marlowe empire. "Excuse me," I said, standing up abruptly. I just need a moment to catch my breath." "Of course, darling," Evelyn said immediately. "The altitude can be difficult if you are not used to it. The terrace is right through those doors. Take all the time you need." I walked to the glass doors and stepped out onto the balcony. The cold mountain air hit me instantly, sharp and cleansing. I grabbed a cashmere blanket that was draped over a patio chair and wrapped it around my shoulders. Below me, the city of Boulder was a grid of twinkling lights, vast and distant. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking again. I dialed the number I knew by heart. Eli picked up on the first ring. "Naomi, are you okay?" Hearing his voice, the familiar warmth of it, almost made me buckle. "I do not know," I whispered, leaning against the stone railing. "Eli, it is insane. The house is like a museum. My parents, they cannot stop crying. They keep touching me." "That is good, right?" Eli asked gently. "They love you. They missed you." "Yes," I said, "but it feels like I am watching it happen to someone else." I looked back through the glass wall into the living room. Graham was pouring a drink. Evelyn was sitting with her head in her hands, weeping softly. And then I saw him. Landon was standing by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, holding a tumbler of amber liquid in the other. He was not looking at his parents. He was looking out the window, directly at me. His expression was unreadable, but his posture radiated hostility. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. "Eli," I said, turning my back to the glass, "my brother is here." "Landon?" Eli asked. "How is he?" I pulled the blanket tighter. "He is cold. Eli." He shook my hand like I was a contagious disease. He looks at me like I am a mistake that needs to be corrected. "Be careful," Eli said, his voice dropping. "You are walking into a world with a lot of money and a lot of power. People get weird when the pie gets resliced." "I know," I said. "I just wish you were here. I feel like I'm undercover in enemy territory." "You are not undercover. Naomi, you are Hazel Marlowe. You belong there." "Do I?" I asked the night air. "You survived 33 years of lies," Eli said firmly. "You can survive one dinner with a jealous brother. I will see you tomorrow. I love you." "I love you too," I said. I hung up and stood there for a moment, gathering my strength. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I had to go back in there. I had to play the part of the grateful daughter. When I slid the glass door open and stepped back into the warmth of the living room, the conversation stopped. Landon set his glass down on the mantelpiece with a sharp clink. Evelyn stood up and walked over to me. She took my face in her hands again, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that was almost painful. "I know this is overwhelming," she said softly. "I know you have a whole life that we missed, a life as Naomi Walker." She said the name Walker with a distasteful curl of her lip, as if it were a dirty word. "But that is over now," she said, her voice fierce and final. "You are safe. You are home. You do not need the name Walker anymore. You are Hazel Marlowe. You are my daughter, and we are going to fix everything that was broken." She hugged me again, tight and possessive. Over her shoulder, I saw Landon watching. He did not look like he wanted to fix anything. He looked like he was calculating exactly how to break me. I hugged my mother back, but in the secret quiet of my own mind, a voice whispered a defiant truth. "Naomi Walker is the one who survived the trailer park." I thought, Naomi Walker is the one who worked 3 jobs and saved herself. Hazel Marlowe is just a ghost. The name Walker might be dirty to you, Mother, but it is the only armor I have, and I am not taking it off just yet. I pulled back and smiled a polite, fragile smile at my new family. "Thank you," I said, but I kept my eyes on Landon, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his expression that mirrored my own. Recognition. He knew this wasn't a reunion, it was a declaration of war. The corner office of Graham Marlowe was larger than the entire footprint of the mobile home I had grown up in. It smelled of espresso and old leather. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of Boulder looked like a circuit board of lights, a world that Graham controlled with the stroke of a pen. He sat behind his desk, looking at me not as a lost daughter, but as a potential asset. "You ran the front office of a busy garage for 5 years, Graham said, tapping a file on his desk. "You managed inventory, you handled logistics, and you dealt with mechanics who, frankly, are not that different from our site foreman." I sat straighter in the uncomfortable designer chair. I was technically Hazel Marlowe now, the heiress to a billion-dollar fortune, but I still felt like Naomi Walker, the girl who checked tire pressure for minimum wage. "I know how to keep things moving," I said. "If a part does not show up, a car does not leave the bay. If the car does not leave, we do not get paid. It is simple math." Graham smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile with genuine professional respect, rather than teary-eyed paternal affection. "Exactly. Marlowe Ridge Group is bleeding money in our transport division. We have trucks crossing 3 state lines carrying half-loads because the scheduling software is a mess. I want you to look at it." He offered me a job, junior logistics analyst. I accepted immediately, not just because I needed the money, though the thought of buying a house with Eli without a mortgage hanging over our heads was dizzying, but because I needed to understand the machinery of this family. I refused to be a trophy, a sad story in a silk dress that they brought out for charity galas. If I was going to be a Marlowe, I needed to know what that cost. Graham pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Landon? Could you come in here, please?" A moment later, the heavy oak doors opened. Landon walked in. He was wearing a navy suit that looked sharp enough to cut skin. He saw me, and for a fraction of a second, his expression was one of pure annoyance, like I was a stain on the carpet. Then, the mask slid into place. "Yes, Dad?" "Your sister is joining the team," Graham announced, beaming. "I am putting her in logistics. I want you to show her the ropes. Get her set up with the system access and walk her through the current vendor contracts." Landon stopped. His eyes flicked to me, cold and calculating. "Logistics?" he repeated, his voice smooth. "That is a complex vertical. Dad, Hazel has been away. She lacks the formal education for corporate supply chain management. She has practical experience," Graham said, waving a hand dismissively. "She knows how the ground level works. You can teach her the high-level strategy. It will be good for you two to bond." Landon turned to me. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator looking at a wounded gazelle. "Of course," he said, "I would be delighted to mentor my big sister." The sabotage began on day 3. It was subtle at first. I would receive calendar invites for meetings 10 minutes after they had started. I would get emails with attachments that were corrupted or password protected. And when I asked Landon's executive assistant for the code, she would apologize and say Landon was in a meeting and could not be disturbed. I sat in a small, glass-walled office on the 20th floor, drowning in data I could not access. I felt stupid. I felt exactly how I had felt when I first started at the garage, staring at an engine block I did not understand. But back then, I had learned. I had stayed late, read the manuals, and asked the old mechanics to teach me. I tried to apply the same logic here, but the corporate world was different. Here, information was a weapon, and Landon was hoarding the ammunition. The first public humiliation happened 2 weeks in. We were in the main conference room. The entire operations board was there. 12 men and women in expensive suits, staring at tablets. Graham sat at the head of the table. Landon stood at the front, presenting the quarterly efficiency report. He looked effortless, charming the room with jokes and graphs. "And now," he said, turning to me, "I believe our new analyst has prepared a breakdown of the fuel costs for the Western region. Hazel?" The room turned to look at me. My stomach dropped. Landon had never asked me to prepare a breakdown. He had sent me a folder of raw fuel receipts at 5 in the afternoon the previous day, with a note that said, "For your review." There had been no instruction to present. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I have reviewed the receipts. Landon." I stammered, but I did not prepare a formal presentation. I was not aware. Landon cut me off with a sympathetic, condescending nod. "Oh, I sent you the memo on Monday. Perhaps it got lost in your inbox? Or maybe the corporate email system is a bit more complex than what you are used to?" A few people chuckled. It was a low, cruel sound. Graham frowned. "Landon, did you send her the request?" "I am sure I did." "Dad," Landon said, tapping his temple, "but it is fine. It is a steep learning curve. We cannot expect her to catch up on 30 years of business acumen in 2 weeks. I can cover her section." He proceeded to present the data I was supposed to have. He made me look incompetent. He made me look like a charity hire who could not even check her email. I sat down, my face burning. I wanted to cry. I wanted to run out of the room and call Eli and tell him to come pick me up. But then, I remembered Frank. I remembered Frank yelling at me when I dropped a wrench. I remembered how I learned to never let him see me cry, because tears just made him meaner. I remembered that in a house full of wolves, you do not bare your neck. You sharpen your teeth. I did not cry. I opened my notebook. I uncapped my pen, and I started writing. I wrote down exactly what Landon said. I noted the discrepancies in his numbers. I noted the way he glossed over the overtime costs in the Denver hub. That night, instead of going home to the empty guest house on the estate, I went down to the loading docks. Landon worked from the penthouse suite. He looked at spreadsheets. He never talked to the drivers. I found the night shift foreman, a guy named Rick, who looked a lot like the mechanics I used to manage. I brought a box of donuts. We sat on the tailgate of a truck, and I asked him why the fleet was bleeding money. He told me everything. He told me about the new routing software Landon had purchased that sent trucks over mountain passes that were closed half the winter, forcing them to double back. He told me about the vendor in Utah, who charged triple for emergency maintenance because the company refused to keep spare parts on site. It was information that never made it to the 20th floor because Landon fired anyone who complained. I spent the next week building my own report. I did not ask Landon for data. I bypassed him. I went to accounting. I went to the fleet managers. I documented everything. Every email Landon ignored. Every file he claimed he sent that never arrived. I took screenshots. I built a paper trail that was bulletproof. At the next monthly review, Graham asked for new business. Landon started to close the meeting. If there is nothing else. Actually, I said, standing up, I have something. Landon froze. His eyes narrowed. Hazel, he said warningly, we are running over time. This will save us $2 million a quarter, I said loudly. Graham looked up. $2 million? Go ahead. I walked to the front of the room. I did not have a fancy PowerPoint. I had a one-page summary, distributed to everyone. The current routing software is inefficient for alpine transport, I said, my voice steady. We are burning 40% more fuel than necessary because we are routing trucks through high-altitude passes that require chains and lower speeds. If we switch to the valley routes and build a small parts depot in Grand Junction to avoid emergency vendor fees, we cut our overhead by 18% immediately. The room was silent. The CFO picked up my paper, adjusting his glasses. The math checks out, the CFO muttered. Why are we not doing this already? I looked at Landon. He was pale. He knew exactly why. He had received a kickback from the software vendor. Rick had told me that rumor too, though I could not prove it yet. I think the operations team has been too focused on the software's theoretical capabilities to look at the reality on the ground, I said diplomatically. Graham beamed. He looked at me with a pride that felt hot and bright. This is excellent work. Hazel, truly excellent. This is the kind of practical thinking we have been missing. Landon said nothing. He stared at the table. His jaw clenched so tight I could see a muscle jumping in his cheek. That night, I stayed late to finish filing the new route proposals. The office was deserted. The lights dimmed to a low hum. I walked toward the break room to get water, passing Landon's office. The door was cracked open. I heard his voice. It was low, venomous, and shaking with rage. She is a problem, he was saying into the phone. No, you do not understand. She is not just playing house. She is actually competent. Dad is eating it up. I stopped, pressing myself against the wall. If she stays, the lawyers are going to trigger the clause. Landon hissed. I cannot let that happen. If the identity verification is fully ratified by the state, the trust unlocks. She strips my veto power. I go from being the heir to being a minority shareholder in my own company. My heart hammered against my ribs. Veto power. Shareholder. Frank had said I was a contract. Now, Landon was saying I was a liability. We need to accelerate the plan, Landon said. I need to make her look unstable. I need Dad to think she is damaged from the trauma. Get me the medical records from her time in Arizona. Anything. I do not care what it costs. I backed away silently, my breath catching in my throat. I ran back to my office, grabbed my bag, and left the building. Back in my room, I called Eli on a secure video line. I told him everything. He is digging for dirt. Naomi, Eli said, his face pixelated on my screen. He is going to try to paint you as crazy or incompetent. I should go to Dad, I said, pacing the room. I should tell him what I heard. No, Eli said firmly. It is your word against his. Landon has spent 30 years building credibility with Graham. You have been there for 3 weeks. If you go in there making accusations without proof, you will look exactly like the paranoid, unstable person Landon wants you to be. Then what do? I asked, feeling the walls closing in again. Let him dig, Eli said. Keep doing your job. Keep saving them money. Keep documenting his sabotage. He is scared. Naomi, that is why he is sloppy. He is going to make a mistake, and when he does, you will be there to catch it. The next morning, I had a meeting with the family attorney, Mr. Sterling. It was supposed to be a routine signing of employment contracts. Mr. Sterling was a dry, ancient man who smelled of mothballs. He laid a stack of papers in front of me. There is one more thing. Ms. Marlowe, he said, pulling a thick document from his briefcase. What is this? I asked. This is the family trust, Sterling said. It was established by your grandfather. He flipped to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. When you were declared dead, your share of the voting rights reverted to the surviving sibling, Landon. However, there is a dormant clause. It is called the reappearance provision. He adjusted his glasses. If the lost heir returns and is proven to be of sound mind and identity, the shares do not just split evenly. Because you are the eldest, the trust stipulates that you hold the tie-breaking vote on the board. You effectively control 51% of the decision-making power regarding the sale or acquisition of assets. I stared at the paper. The legal jargon danced before my eyes. So, I said slowly, realizing the magnitude of what I was reading, if I sign this, Landon answers to me? Sterling nodded. In essence, yes. Currently, Landon runs the company because your father lets him. But legally, once this is filed, you are the one who decides the future of the Marlowe Ridge Group. I leaned back in my chair. It was not just jealousy. It was not just sibling rivalry. Landon had been the king of the castle for 33 years, and I had just walked in and stolen his crown without even knowing I was wearing it. No wonder he wanted to destroy me. He was not fighting for his father's love. He was fighting for his life. I picked up the pen. I remembered the look on Landon's face when I presented the fuel savings. I remembered the phone call where he plotted to dig up my medical records. I signed the paper. I am ready, I told Mr. Sterling. I walked out of the lawyer's office with a new understanding. I was not just a survivor anymore. I was a threat. And if Landon wanted a war, he was going to find out that the girl from the trailer park knew how to fight a lot dirtier than the boy from the boardroom. The evening began with the smell of old paper and expensive scotch. Before the guests arrived, Graham asked me to join him in the library, a room so vast it had a spiral staircase to reach the upper shelves. The fire was crackling, casting long, dancing shadows on the Persian rug, but my father looked cold. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass but did not drink it. He just held it, staring into the flames. I have to tell you something. Hazel, he said. His voice was rough, stripping away the CEO persona he wore like armor. I sat on the edge of a leather armchair that probably cost more than my entire education. What is it? For 33 years, I told myself it was bad luck. Graham said, I told myself it was a tragedy no one could have predicted. But that is a lie. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were haunted. The park where you were taken. The security team had recommended upgrading the perimeter sensors and hiring 2 additional guards a month before you disappeared. I rejected the proposal. I thought it was excessive. I thought, who would touch a Marlowe in broad daylight? I wanted you to have a normal childhood, not live in a fortress. He took a shaking breath. I saved a few $1,000s on a budget sheet, and it cost me my daughter. That is why I worked every day you were gone. I thought if I could build an empire big enough, strong enough, I could somehow buy back the past. But I couldn't. I looked at this powerful man, broken by a decision made 3 decades ago. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream at him for being cheap with my safety while living in a palace. But looking at the agony etched into his face, I only felt a heavy, dull sadness. It was not your fault, I said quietly. It was the kidnapper's fault. Graham shook his head, refusing the absolution. Evelyn walked in then. She was dressed in a shimmering silver gown, looking like royalty, but her hands were twisting a diamond ring on her finger nervously. The guests are arriving, she said. She looked at Graham, then at me. There was a desperate brightness in her eyes, a brittle fragility that made me worry she might shatter if someone spoke too loudly. There is something else, she said, her voice rushing. Before we go out there, before the aunts and cousins start asking questions. She took a step toward me. After you were gone, after 5 years, when the police stopped calling, the silence in this house was unbearable. It was so quiet, I could hear the dust settle. So, we tried to fill it, I frowned. What do you mean? We adopted, she whispered, a girl. Her name was Sophie. My breath hitched. Sophie. The name felt like a phantom limb. Where is she? I asked. I haven't seen any photos. Landon hasn't mentioned her. Evelyn looked away, shame flushing her cheeks. It was complicated. We used a private facilitator. We wanted it to be discreet because the media was still obsessed with your disappearance. We didn't want the new baby to be compared to you constantly." She paused, swallowing hard. Sophie was a sweet girl, but she never felt settled here. She always felt like she was a replacement. When she turned 18, we had a terrible fight. She wanted to go to art school in Europe. Graham wanted her to study business. She shouted that she wasn't our real daughter anyway, packed a bag, and left that night. We haven't seen her since. I stared at them. They had lost 2 daughters, one stolen, one driven away. "So I am not the only ghost in this house," I said. Evelyn reached for my hand. "You are the only one that matters now. You are back." The dinner was a spectacle. The dining room table was set for 20 people, laden with silver candelabras and arrangements of white roses that were so perfect they looked fake. The guests were a parade of high society: uncles who ran hedge funds, cousins who modeled in Paris, aunts who looked at me with open curiosity, as if I were a circus exhibit. And then there was Eli. My husband walked in wearing his best suit, the one we had bought for a friend's wedding 3 years ago. It was ill-fitting compared to the bespoke tailoring around him. He looked terrified. When I introduced him, Graham shook his hand firmly, but I saw the assessment in my father's eyes. He was checking for calluses. He was checking for weakness. "This is Eli," I said, squeezing his arm. "He is a history teacher, and he is the reason I survived." We sat down. The first course was a soup that tasted like lobster and heavy cream. The conversation was polite, stilted. People asked me safe questions. "Do you like Colorado? Have you tried skiing?" They avoided the words kidnapping or trailer park as if they were contagious diseases. Landon sat across from us. He was drinking red wine, watching Eli over the rim of his glass. He looked like a panther waiting for a deer to limp. "So, Eli," Landon said during a lull in the conversation. The sound of his silverware clinking against the china seemed incredibly loud. "You are a teacher, noble profession. Does not pay much. Though, does it?" Graham cleared his throat. "Landon, I am just making conversation." "Dad," Landon said smoothly, "I am curious. It must be quite a shift for you. Eli, going from a teacher's salary to, well, this." He gestured around the room at the gold leaf ceiling. Eli set his spoon down. His hand was trembling slightly, but his voice was steady. "I am not interested in the money. Landon, I am just glad Hazel, is back with her family." "Of course," Landon said. He smiled, a shark smile. "Tell me, where did you go to university?" "State," Eli said. "Class of 2010. Landon nodded slowly. "Ah, yes, State. Good school. Expensive for an out-of-state student. Though, you were an orphan too, right?" "That is what Hazel mentioned. Foster care system?" Eli stiffened. "Yes. Hard to pay tuition with no family support," Landon mused. He swirled his wine. "Unless you had help." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Landon was leading him somewhere. I wanted to kick Eli under the table, to tell him to stop talking, but it was too late. "I was lucky," Eli said modestly. "I got a scholarship." Landon's eyes lit up. "A scholarship? That is fantastic. Do you remember which one?" Eli shrugged. "It was an anonymous donor. The Bright Future Grant or something like that. It covered full tuition and board. I never knew who sent it." The room went deadly silent. Even the waiter stopped moving. Landon let out a short, dry laugh. "The Bright Future Grant," he repeated. He looked at Graham. "Dad, does that sound familiar to you?" Graham's face had gone pale. He put his napkin on the table. "That is one of our charitable arms," Graham said, his voice low. "The Marlowe Foundation funded the Bright Future program for 5 years. It was designed for underprivileged youth in the state system." Landon turned back to Eli, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "Well, isn't that a coincidence?" "What?" Eli looked confused. He looked from Landon to Graham, then to me. "I didn't know. It was anonymous." Landon leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table. "Let me get the timeline straight," he said. his voice projecting to the back of the room. 15 years ago, you, a foster kid with zero connections, received a full-ride scholarship funded entirely by the Marlowe family. You graduate, and then, out of all the gas stations in all the cities in America, you just happen to walk into the one where the lost Marlowe heiress is working the night shift. "Landon, stop," I said, standing up. My legs felt weak. "No. Hazel, listen," Landon snapped. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes locked on Eli. "You befriend her. You marry her. You encourage her to find her roots. And now, here you are, sitting at a table with a net worth of $10 billion. He paused for effect. Is that destiny, Eli? Or is that the longest, most patient con game in history? The whispers started immediately. The aunts leaned in, murmuring behind their hands. Graham was staring at Eli with a look of dawning horror. The paranoia that had festered in him for 33 years, the fear that everyone wanted to take something from him, was flaring up. Eli stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is insane," Eli said. His face was red. "I didn't know who she was. She didn't know who she was. And I had no idea the scholarship came from you people." "Didn't you?" Landon asked softly. "Or did you know exactly who signed the checks? Did you find out about the missing daughter and go hunting?" Graham stood up. His voice thundered across the table. "Is it true?" Graham demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Eli. "Did you know? Did you use my money to track down my daughter?" "No!" Eli shouted, looking desperate. "I swear to God. Graham, I love her. I didn't know anything about the Marlowes until the DNA test." I looked at my husband. I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw the man who had made me peanut butter sandwiches when I was starving. I knew him. I knew his heart. But the coincidence. My mind raced. A scholarship from my biological father paid for my husband's degree? It was mathematically impossible. Unless someone had arranged it. Evelyn stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Stop it," she screamed. "Stop it, all of you! You are ruining this night. Landon, you are being cruel. Eli is family now." "Is he?" Landon stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at me, then at Eli, and finally at his parents. He threw his napkin onto his plate. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel falling. "You people are so desperate to be happy that you are blind," Landon said. He walked toward the door, but stopped behind my chair. He leaned down, whispering so only I, and Eli, could hear, though the silence in the room carried his voice to every corner. "You know, it is funny," Landon said. "Sophie, the sister who ran away? She used to talk about a boy she met in the foster system, a boy she helped get a scholarship because she felt sorry for him." He looked at Eli, whose face had drained of all color. 33 years later, Landon sneered, "and this family still loves raising strangers." He walked out of the room. I looked at Eli. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the empty doorway where Landon had vanished, and he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Eli," I whispered. He turned to me. His eyes were wide, terrified. "Sophie," he mouthed. And in that second, the ground beneath me dissolved. He knew the name, my husband, the only truth in my life, knew the name of the sister who had vanished. The dinner was over. The war had just begun. The silence in the Marlowe estate after that dinner was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom before a verdict is read. For 3 days, the house felt like a battleground. Graham did not throw Eli out, but he did something worse. He unleashed the lawyers. I sat in the library on a Tuesday morning, watching my husband undergo what Graham called a standard vetting process for security purposes. To me, it looked like an interrogation. 2 men in dark suits, corporate attorneys on the Marlowe payroll, were asking Eli about his credit card debt from college, a missed rent payment in 2015, and the exact nature of his relationship with every foster sibling he had ever known. "This is for your protection." "Hazel," Graham said. He was standing by the window, refusing to look at me. "If he is legitimate, he has nothing to fear. But Landon raised a valid point. The statistical probability of that scholarship connection is infinitesimal. We have to be sure he's not a bad actor. I looked at Eli. He looked exhausted. He was answering their questions politely, but his eyes were dull. He looked like a man who was slowly accepting that he had lost his wife to a bank account. That was the moment I snapped. I stood up and walked over to the attorneys. I picked up the file they were recording notes in and closed it shut. "We are done," I said. Graham turned around. "Hazel, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had not let myself feel since the day Frank kicked me out. "I am being the most reasonable person in this room. You are treating the man who saved my life like a criminal because your son is paranoid about his inheritance." I walked up to Graham. I stood toe-to-toe with the billionaire, and I did not flinch. I lived in a trailer with black mold on the ceiling. I told him. I ate expired food. I had no one. The only person who saw me as a human being, the only person who loved me when I had absolutely nothing to offer, was Eli. I pointed at my husband. "If you do not trust him, then you do not trust my judgment. And if you do not trust my judgment, then you do not have a daughter. You just have a genetic match that you are trying to control." Graham looked stunned. He opened his mouth to speak, but I turned my back on him. "Come on, Eli," I said. "We are going for a drive." I took Eli back to the hotel, told him to sleep, and promised him I would fix this. Then, I went back to the house. I was not going to sulk. I was going to investigate. I needed to find the ghost. I needed to find Sophie. If Landon was right about the connection, then Sophie was the key. But if Landon was wrong about the motive, then Sophie was the exoneration. I started with Arthur, the head of the household staff. He had been with the Marlowes for 40 years. He knew where the skeletons were buried because he was usually the one dusting them. I found him in the pantry, polishing silver. "Arthur," I said, leaning against the door frame, "tell me about Sophie." Arthur hesitated, his cloth pausing over a soup spoon. "Ms. Hazel, your mother prefers not to discuss." "I do not care what my mother prefers." I cut in. "My husband's reputation is being destroyed because of a coincidence involving my adopted sister. I need to know who she was. Really, not the version my parents tell at cocktail parties." Arthur sighed. He looked old then, the weight of the family's secrets pulling at his shoulders. He put the spoon down. "She was a spirited child," he said softly. "Spirited and sad. She had brown hair, wild and curly. She was an artist, painted on everything. Canvas, walls, her own shoes." "Did she hate it here?" I asked. "She felt misplaced." Arthur chose the word carefully. "Your parents, God bless them. They tried, but they were grieving you. Sophie knew that. She used to tell me that she felt like a placeholder, a Band-Aid on a bullet wound." I nodded. I knew that feeling. Frank and Lorna had made me feel like an obligation. Sophie must have felt like a prop. "Do you have anything of hers?" I asked. "Anything she left behind?" Arthur looked toward the kitchen door to make sure we were alone. Then he beckoned me closer. "When she left a letter." He whispered, "Your mother burned the original in the fireplace. She was so hurt, but I kept a scan. I thought, perhaps one day, the girl might come back, and they would want to remember why she left." He led me to his small office off the kitchen and opened a locked drawer. He handed me a single sheet of paper. I stared at the handwriting. It was jagged, artistic, filled with loops and sharp angles. "Dear Mom and Dad, I cannot breathe here anymore. I am tired of being the ornament you hang on the family tree to make it look full. You gave me everything money could buy, but you never looked at me without seeing the daughter you lost. I am not Hazel. I never will be. I am going to find out who I am when I am not being paid to be perfect. Do not look for me. I am going to help people who actually need it. People who are real. Sophie." My blood ran cold. I knew that phrasing. I knew that specific angry cadence. The ornament on the tree. Paid to be perfect. I pulled out my phone and frantically scrolled back through my email archives. Back to the days when Eli and I were first dating. I found an email he had sent me when he was frustrated with his student teaching placement, venting about the wealthy parents of his students. I held the phone up next to the letter. Eli had written, "These kids are just ornaments to their parents. They are trophies. I hate it. Naomi, I hate this fake perfection. It reminds me of the foster homes where they just wanted the check from the state. I want to help people who are real." The echo was undeniable. It was the same voice, the same pain. I thanked Arthur and ran up to my room. I pinned the letter to the corkboard I had set up on the back of my closet door. My war room. I started digging into the adoption. Evelyn had said they used a private facilitator. I found the name in an old ledger in the library archives. New Horizons Family Placement. I searched for them online. The website was dead. The domain had expired 10 years ago. I dug deeper. Using the skills I had learned from tracking down rare car parts, I found forum posts, legal complaints. New Horizons was not a standard agency. It was a boutique firm that specialized in high-discretion placements for wealthy clients. They had been investigated twice for falsifying birth records to protect the privacy of adoptive parents. They were a cleaner, more expensive version of the people who had sold me to Frank and Lorna. I drove to the address listed on the old invoice. It was a strip mall in Denver, now occupied by a dry cleaner. I went to the county clerk's office and pulled the incorporation papers for New Horizons. The principal officer was a woman named Lydia Grant. I searched Lydia Grant. She had died 5 years ago, but her partner, a man named Marcus Thorne, was still listed as a registered notary in the state. I called Marcus Thorne. I lied. I told him I was a personal assistant to Graham Marlowe, and that we were updating our estate records regarding the adoption of Sophie Marlowe from 20 years ago. The man on the other end went silent for a long time. "That file is closed," he said, his voice tight. "We just need to verify the origin of the child," I said, keeping my voice professional. "For the trust fund." He laughed, a nervous, bitter laugh. "Origin? Lady, you people paid $50,000 not to know the origin. That was the deal. Clean slate. No birth parents popping up to demand money." My hand gripped the phone. "So she was not an orphan?" I asked. "She was a ward of the state," he corrected, "but she was older than we usually placed. She was 8. She had been in the system for a while, bounced around. She had attachments. We had to sever them to give her a fresh start with you billionaires." Attachments. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. The pieces slammed together in my mind, forming a picture that was tragic and beautiful and devastating. Sophie was not a random baby. She was an 8-year-old girl pulled out of the foster system, a system where she had friends, where she had bonds. Eli had been in the system at the same time. I called Eli. "Eli," I said, skipping the greeting, "when you were a kid, in the group home in Denver, the one before you got sent to the nice family in Aurora, was there a girl? A girl who liked to paint?" There was silence on the line. Then, Eli's voice came back, small and confused. "You mean Songbird?" "Songbird?" "Yeah, that was her nickname. She hummed when she drew. She was my best friend when I was 7. She was the only one who defended me when the older kids stole my food." "What happened to her?" I asked, tears pricking my eyes. "One day, she was just gone," Eli said. "The social worker said she hit the jackpot. Said a rich family took her and we would never see her again. I cried for months." I looked at the letter on my wall. "Eli," I said, my voice trembling, "that girl was Sophie, my sister." "What?" "She did not forget you. Eli, she got adopted by the Marlowes. She grew up in this castle, hating it, missing her friend, and when she got access to her trust fund, she didn't buy a car. She found you. She set up the scholarship." I realized aloud. She used the Marlowe money to save the boy she left behind, and then she ran away to find herself, knowing you were safe. "It wasn't a con, Eli. It was a rescue." I sank onto the floor of the closet. Landon was right about the connection, but he was wrong about the villain. Eli wasn't a predator. He was a beneficiary of the only good thing the Marlowe money had ever done. And the irony was bitter. My sister, the one I had never met, had saved my husband long before I ever met him. She was the invisible thread tying us all together. I looked at the map on my wall. Frank and Lorna stealing me, the Marlowes buying Sophie to replace me, Sophie saving Eli, Eli saving me, and now, Landon trying to destroy us all to keep the money. It was a cycle of people using children as currency, as emotional plugs, as assets. I stood up, I wiped my face. I was done playing defense. I was done trying to prove I was worthy of the name Marlowe. I walked out of the closet and grabbed the entire file, the letter, the corporate records of the shady adoption agency, the notes from my conversation with the broker. Landon wanted to talk about family values? Fine. I was going to show him exactly what this family's values had bought. I texted Graham. Family meeting. Tonight, 10 p.m. I know about Sophie, and I know about the scholarship. Then I texted Agent Hale at the MCIU. I have a lead on a second child trafficking ring involving high net worth clients. You might want to come to the Marlowe estate tonight. Bring a warrant. I was going to burn it down, not the house, but the lies. I was going to expose Frank, Lorna, the brokers, and yes, even Graham's desperate, blind checkbook diplomacy. I walked to the mirror and looked at myself. I did not see the scared girl from the trailer park. I did not see the heiress. I saw a woman holding a match. The boardroom on the top floor of the Marlowe Ridge Group headquarters was designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of black marble long enough to land a small plane on. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the mountains that made us all look like gods looking down on the mortals below. But the atmosphere inside was anything but godlike. It was savage. Graham sat at the head of the table, looking 10 years older than he had at dinner. Evelyn sat beside him, pale and silent. Down the length of the table sat the board of directors, 12 men and women who controlled the fate of billions of dollars. And across from me sat Landon. He looked confident. He had spent the last 48 hours whipping the votes, whispering poison into the ears of the shareholders. Graham cleared his throat. We are here to discuss the motion regarding the executive restructuring and the activation of the reappearance provision for Hazel Marlowe, he said. Landon stood up immediately. He buttoned his jacket, smoothing the fabric with a calm, predatory grace. Before we proceed, he said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, I must speak on behalf of the operational stability of this company. We are all emotional right now. We are all relieved that my sister has returned. It is a miracle. He paused, looking at each board member in turn. But we cannot run a Fortune 500 company on miracles. We run it on trust. And right now, there are too many shadows hanging over this family. We have a claimant who has spent her life in poverty, lacking any corporate education, suddenly demanding veto power, and more concerning, she is married to a man who received secret funding from our own foundation years before accidentally finding her. Landon pointed a finger at me, but his eyes were on the board. I moved to suspend the transfer of shares indefinitely until a full forensic investigation into Eli Carter and his connection to the Marlowe Foundation is complete. We cannot let this company be the victim of a long con. A murmur went through the room. Heads nodded. It was a compelling narrative. The poor girl and the grifter husband coming for the kingdom. Graham looked at me. His eyes were pleading, as if asking me not to make a scene, to just accept the delay. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my hands were steady. I placed a heavy stack of files on the black marble. I agree with Landon. I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs. We cannot run this company on shadows. We need sunlight. I opened the first folder. Landon talks about trust. I said, so let us talk about the logistical audit of the Western region. I signaled to the tech assistant, who projected an email chain onto the main screen behind me. 2 weeks ago, Landon accused me of incompetence for missing a report. Here is the metadata from the server log. It shows that Landon deleted the attachment from the email before sending it to me. He manufactured a failure to humiliate me in front of this board. Landon scoffed. This is petty administrative. I am not finished, I said, my voice rising. I clicked the remote. A spreadsheet appeared. It was a complex web of transactions. While investigating the transport inefficiencies, I found something interesting. We pay a consulting firm called Apex Solutions $300,000 a quarter for route optimization. Apex Solutions has no website, no office. Its registered address is a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. I looked directly at Landon. And the signatory for the bank account associated with Apex is not a consultant. It is Landon Marlowe. The room erupted. The CFO stood up, his face turning red, adjusting his glasses to stare at the screen. He has been siphoning money from his own department for 5 years. I continued. He creates problems in the logistics chain, hires his own shell company to fix them, and pockets the fee. That is why he didn't want me in logistics. That is why he sabotaged me. He wasn't protecting the company from my incompetence. He was protecting his embezzlement from my eyes. Landon slammed his hand on the table. This is a fabrication. She is twisting the data. Sit down, Landon, Graham roared. It was the voice of the CEO, not the father. Landon sat, seething. I took a breath. That was the first strike. Now for the kill. As for my husband, I said, softening my tone, Landon accused Eli of being a con artist because he received a scholarship from the Marlowe Foundation. He claimed Eli knew about the family money. I pulled out the letter Arthur had saved, the letter from Sophie. I handed the original to Graham. Read the handwriting, Dad, I said. Graham put on his reading glasses. He looked at the jagged, artistic loops of the letter his adopted daughter had left before vanishing. Then I handed him a photocopy of the scholarship recommendation form I had dug up from the Foundation's archives that morning. It was the same handwriting. The anonymous donor who recommended Eli for the Bright Future grant wasn't a stranger. I said, it was Sophie. She met Eli in the foster system when they were kids. She knew he was good. She knew he was smart. And when she got access to her allowance here, she didn't buy jewelry. She secretly funded a way out for her friend. I looked at the board. Eli didn't know the money came from the Marlowes. He only knew he had a guardian angel. Sophie saved him. And 15 years later, he saved me. There is no con. There is only kindness that this family was too blind to see. Graham dropped the papers. He was weeping openly now. But I wasn't done. I signaled to the back of the room. The doors opened, and Agent Jonas Hale from the MCIU walked in. He was carrying a briefcase. I asked the federal authorities to join us. I said, because what happened to me and what happened to Sophie are connected. Hale stepped forward. He placed a warrant on the table. Based on evidence provided by Ms. Marlowe, he announced, we have uncovered a network. The adoption agency you used to find Sophie, New Horizons, was a front. They didn't just place orphans, they laundered children. Hale looked at Graham and Evelyn. We have financial records linking New Horizons to the same broker network that Frank and Lorna Walker used to obtain a fake birth certificate for Hazel. And here's the hard part. Hale paused. The broker who facilitated Sophie's adoption. He was on a retainer. He was paid $50,000 a year as a scout by the Marlowe Charitable Foundation. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth. You thought you were paying for expedited adoption services, Hale said gently, but you were funding the very network that steals children. You paid the people who likely helped hide your own daughter. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a world shattering. Graham looked at his hands, the hands that had signed the checks, the hands that had built the empire. He realized that in his grief and impatience, he had fed the monster that ate his family. I looked at them all, my biological parents, broken by guilt, my brother, exposed as a thief, the board members, looking at the floor. I lived in a trailer for 33 years, I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. I was treated like an object. Frank and Lorna treated me like a fulfilled contract. You treated Sophie like a replacement part for a broken machine. And Landon treats this company like a personal piggy bank. I looked at Landon. You were right about one thing. Landon, This family does have a problem. But it is not me. The problem is that you all treat people like assets. You think you can buy children to fix your grief. You think you can buy silence. You think you can buy loyalty. I placed my hand on the table. I am not an asset. I am not a ghost. And I am not a line item on a spreadsheet. I am the only person in this room who knows the cost of a human life. And I am taking control. The vote was unanimous. Landon was removed from his position as Chief Operations Director immediately. Security escorted him out. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just looked at me with a cold, dead stare as he walked past, stripped of the only thing he ever loved, his power. Graham and Evelyn resigned from active management of the foundation. In the aftermath, the board appointed an interim CEO from the outside, a crisis manager with a reputation for ethics, but the condition was clear. I would serve as co-chair of the supervisory board. Nothing would happen in this company without my eyes on it. 2 hours later, the room was empty except for me, Graham, and Eli, who had been waiting in the hallway. Graham walked over to Eli. The billionaire looked small. He looked humbled. "I am sorry," Graham said. He held out his hand. "I was wrong. I was so afraid of being used that I couldn't recognize a good man." Eli took his hand. "It is okay. Graham, we are just trying to survive." Graham nodded. Then he looked at me. "We are going to fix the foundation," he said. "We are going to work with the MCIU. We are going to use every dime of that endowment to hunt down every broker, every agency, every person who sells kids. I want you to run it. Eli, you and Hazel." I looked at the brass nameplate that the secretary had just slid onto the table in front of my new seat. It didn't say Naomi Walker, and it didn't just say Hazel Marlowe. It read, Hazel Naomi Marlowe. I reached out and traced the letters with my finger. For 33 years, I had been a girl with no name. Then I was a girl with a dead name. Then I was a ghost. Now, I was everything. I was the survivor of the trailer park. I was the heiress of the mountain. I was the wife of a good man. I looked out the window at the sun setting over the Rockies, casting long golden shadows over the world. The war was over. The shadows were still there. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what was hiding in them, because I was the one holding the light. Thank you so much for listening to this entire journey of Naomi, from the dust of the trailer park to the top of the empire. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe winding down at home? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who love a good drama. See you in the next story.